woman stood in the snow with a little boy clinging to her skirt. The grave behind her was still raw, the wood cross still wet from her hands. Somewhere out in the dark, wolves were circling closer, patient as hunger. She had one rifle with barely any bullets. She had almost no food, and she had nowhere left to run. Then footsteps came through the trees. Heavy, certain. A shape stepped into the firelight, big as a bear and twice as silent. He looked at her the way the wilderness looks at a wounded deer. When he spoke, his voice was low and hard. He offered warmth. He offered shelter. He offered survival. But his price was something she could not afford to lose. What choice does a mother make when death is listening? The winter of 1873 had taken her husband in a single morning. Not with sickness or age, but with lead and cruelty. One moment he had been standing beside their wagon with his rifle raised, shouting for her to stay down. The next, he was in the snow with his eyes wide and empty, like he could not believe the world would end so fast. Evelyn Harper had buried him with hands that did not feel like her own. She had broken a wagon spoke, driven it into the ground, and tied another across it. She did not cry while she worked. If she cried, she would not stop. The wind would steal her tears anyway. Now she stood with her son Caleb pressed against her leg. He was 5. His cheeks were red with cold, but his lips had a blue tint that made her heart squeeze tight. "Mama," he whispered, "when is Papa coming back?" Evelyn knelt in the snow and pulled him into her arms. His small body shook through every layer she had wrapped around him. "Papa is with God now," she said. "I am here. I will keep you safe." She said it like a promise. She did not know how to keep it. The attack had come 3 days earlier, just after dawn. Their wagon train had been small. 4 wagons, 2 families and a pair of older men headed west for work. They had planned to cut through the high country and reach the settlement called Pine Hollow before the deep snows came. But the snow came early. And the men who lived by taking came early too. Bandits had swept in like crows, hungry and loud. Evelyn remembered the cracking sound of rifles, the screams of horses, the smell of powder and fear. Thomas Harper had fired until his hands smoked. He had stood between her and the men with wild eyes and a steady aim. Then one shot rang different than the rest. Lower. Final. Evelyn had dragged Caleb under the overturned wagon when the shooting got too close. She had pressed her palm over his mouth so the bandits would not hear his cries. She had held him so tight she left bruises on his ribs. He did not complain. He just stared at her with wide, wet eyes and tried to breathe quietly. When the noise finally died, she waited long after her muscles started shaking. Silence can be a trick in the wilderness. Silence can mean the wolf is still near. When she finally crawled out, the world was broken. Wagons burned in the distance. One horse lay stiff in the snow with its eyes open. The other travelers were gone. Dead, or fled, or taken. She did not know which was worse. The bandits had stripped them clean. They took the horses. They took the blankets. They took the flour and coffee and sugar that had been meant to carry them to a new life. They even took Thomas's good boots, leaving his feet in thin socks like an insult. Evelyn found his body where he fell. She did not scream. The sound would not bring him back. She only sat beside him and laid her forehead against his coat until her breath turned to frost. Then she made herself stand, because Caleb was still alive, and alive meant moving. Now, with the grave behind them, she stared west into the trees. Somewhere beyond those mountains was Pine Hollow. Thomas had shown her the map at night by lantern light, tracing the route with his finger. 18 miles through Grizzly Gap, he had said. 2 days in good weather. This was not good weather. This was a winter that wanted bodies. Evelyn went back to the wreckage and took what the bandits had not wanted. A small sack of cornmeal. A few dried beans. A dented pot. Thomas's rifle. 6 cartridges. A tin cup. Their family Bible, damp but intact. She slung the sack over her shoulder and nearly fell from the weight. Hunger makes everything heavier. Grief does too. She wrapped Caleb in every scrap of cloth she could find. An extra skirt, a shawl, a torn blanket corner. He looked like a little bundle of rags, but he was warm enough to keep breathing. "We are going on an adventure," she told him, forcing her lips to shape a smile. "We are brave, like the explorers in your picture book." Caleb sniffed, his eyes fixed on the cross behind them. "Is Papa coming on the adventure?" Evelyn swallowed hard. She reached up and wiped snow off his lashes with her thumb. "He will be with us in our hearts," she said. It was all she had. They started walking as the sun crawled through thick clouds, weak and pale. The snow was knee-deep in places. It pulled at her skirts and soaked through her shoes until her toes felt like stone. The forest leaned in around them, dark pines heavy with white, branches bending like tired arms. Every sound made her flinch. A branch crack, a gust through needles, the distant knock of wood. The wilderness did not care that she was a widow. The wilderness only cared if she could endure. Caleb began to lag after the first mile. His breath came in little sharp bursts. He stumbled and nearly fell face first into a drift. Evelyn scooped him up, though her arms screamed from the strain. She carried him until her shoulders burned and her lungs felt like they were bleeding. Then she set him down and made him walk again. "Just a little sweet boy," she whispered. "One more step, then one more." By midday, she knew they would not make it far. The snow was too deep. The cold was too cruel. Her boots were thin, and the wet inside them turned to ice. She found a fallen log swept clear on one side, and she sank onto it like an old woman. Caleb leaned into her lap, his eyes half closed. "Hungry, Mama," he whispered. Evelyn took a pinch of cornmeal and poured it into the tin cup. She scooped snow on top and stirred with her finger until it became a pale paste. It looked like nothing. It tasted like nothing. But Caleb ate it like it was a feast. As he swallowed, he looked up at her with sleepy trust. That trust cut deeper than hunger. They only had enough food for a few days if she stretched it. She tried not to think of the number. Numbers can frighten you when you are weak. The sun slid toward the tree line. Shadows lengthened. The air grew sharper, as if night was sharpening its teeth. Then she heard it. A howl. Not far. Not one wolf either. A call, answered by another, then another, until the sound braided together and wrapped around the trees. Evelyn's body went cold in a new way. Fear is different than weather. Fear can freeze your bones from the inside. She stood so fast her head spun. She grabbed the rifle and held Caleb's hand. "We need shelter," she muttered. Her eyes searched the forest, frantic. A hollow under a fallen spruce. Too open. A thick cluster of boulders. There, a shallow cut in the rock, like a half cave. She dragged Caleb toward it, stumbling through snow. When they reached the rocks, she shoved branches into the opening to block the wind. Her fingers fumbled. They did not want to close. She found matches in her pocket, wrapped in oilcloth. Damp. She struck one. It sputtered and died. She struck another. It flared, then went out. Her hands were shaking too much. Caleb whimpered. "Mama, I am here," she said, though her voice trembled. "I am here." On the third match, the flame caught. She fed it pine needles and dry bark from under the rock shelf. The fire came to life slowly, small and mean, but alive. Night fell hard. The forest became a wall of black. The howls came again, closer now. Evelyn could not see the wolves, but she felt them. She felt eyes watching beyond the ring of firelight. She sat with the rifle across her knees, trying to keep her breathing quiet. Caleb pressed against her side so tightly it hurt. "Tell me about Papa," he whispered. Evelyn stared into the flames. Her throat tightened until it ached. "Your Papa could build anything," she said softly. "He could make a chair from a pile of boards. He could fix a broken wheel in the rain, and when he held you, he looked like the whole world finally made sense. Caleb sniffed and rubbed his face against her sleeve. I miss him. I do too, she whispered. The fire began to fade. The wood was wet. The heat thinned. Cold crept back in, slow and patient. Evelyn fed in the last of her dry kindling, watching the flames rise, then settle. She knew what would happen when it died. The night would come all the way in. The wolves would come closer. The cold would press down until breath turned shallow. She prayed without moving her lips. Not for herself. For Caleb. Then she heard something that was not wind and not wolves. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps crunching snow. Evelyn snapped the rifle up, her arms trembling. She pointed into the dark and forced her voice to be loud. Who is there? Stay back! I am armed! The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was only the crackle of the weak fire and Caleb's small breath. Then, a shape stepped forward, filling the space between trees like a shadow made solid. He was enormous. Broad shoulders under a coat of rough hide. A thick beard covered most of his face, and ice clung to it like frost on moss. His eyes caught the firelight and held it, dark and steady, the eyes of a man who did not scare easy. He carried a long rifle in one hand, as if it weighed nothing. Evelyn's finger tightened on the trigger. Her whole body shook. Stay back, she said again, though it sounded like begging now. The man looked at the dying fire, looked at the child, looked at her cracked hands and thin boots and the rifle shaking in her grip. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough, and close to a growl. That fire will be dead in an hour, he said. You will be dead an hour after that. Evelyn tried to swallow, but her mouth was too dry. We will manage, she said. The man took one step closer. The wolves went quiet, as if they were listening too. Evelyn smelled him then. Wood smoke. Animal grease. Cold air. Something wild. Where is your man? He asked. Evelyn's eyes burned. Dead, she said. Bandits. The man's gaze shifted for a heartbeat. Like something old moved inside him. Not pity, something harder. You are alone, he said. Evelyn lifted her chin, even though her knees wanted to fold. We are going to Pine Hollow, she said. We do not need help. The man gave a short laugh that sounded like stone scraping stone. Pine Hollow is 5 days from here in weather like this, he said. You have food for 5 days. Strength to carry the boy when the drifts get deeper. Knowledge of which pass will bury you alive. Elin did not answer. The truth sat between them, heavy. In one sudden motion he moved. Faster than a man his size should move. The rifle was knocked aside before she could even blink. The barrel pointed into the snow. He loomed close enough that she saw scars on his face, pale lines like old lightning. His voice dropped lower. Your body is mine until I have my sons, he growled. The words hung in the air. Ugly. Final. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But Caleb made a small sound, a frightened whimper, and his hands clenched at her skirt. Evelyn looked down at her son's blue lips, his thin arms, the way he trembled. Then she looked back up at the mountain man's eyes. Not soft, not kind, but steady, certain. Like the mountain itself. You come with me, he said, or you die here. Choose. Evelyn's throat worked. Pride did not warm children. Anger did not fill bellies. A dead mother could not protect a living boy. She pulled Caleb close and forced the words out. We will come, she whispered. The mountain man nodded once, like the matter was settled. He bent and lifted her sack with one hand, as if it was nothing. Then he kicked snow over the weak fire until it hissed and vanished. Keep up, he said, and he turned into the trees. Evelyn gathered Caleb into her arms and followed, stepping into the dark behind the broad back of a stranger who might save them or break them. Behind them, the wolves began to howl again, long and mournful. Evelyn did not look back. They walked through the night without rest. The mountain man never slowed. He moved through the snow like it belonged to him, boots finding ground where Evelyn only saw white. His broad back broke the wind for her, but the cold still cut deep, finding every weak place in her body. Caleb grew heavy in her arms. His head lolled against her shoulder, breath shallow and uneven. Several times she stumbled, and each time a large hand caught her wrist before she could fall. The grip was iron, not gentle, not cruel, just sure. After what felt like hours, the man stopped beneath a steep ridge where the trees grew thick and close. Moonlight barely touched the ground. "Give me the boy," he said. Evelyn clutched Caleb tighter. "I can carry him." He turned, eyes glinting in the pale light. "You can barely stand." "Give him here, or we all freeze." Her arms were shaking so badly she could not hide it. Slowly she passed Caleb into his arms. The man tucked the child inside his heavy hide coat, wrapping him close to his chest. Caleb whimpered once, then went still, warmth stealing him into sleep. The man grabbed Evelyn's wrist again. "Hold on, ground's slick." They climbed, straight up through trees and rock. Her breath burned. Her legs screamed. Ice hid under fresh snow, and twice her feet slid out from under her. Each time, his grip kept her upright. When dawn finally crept into the sky, pale and weak, they reached a small clearing carved into the mountainside. A cabin crouched against the rock face like it had grown there. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney. Evelyn's knees nearly gave out. The man shoved open the heavy door and waved her inside. Heat struck her like a blow. Her skin stung as feeling rushed back. She gasped, dizzy, blinking through tears she did not remember shedding. The cabin was larger than it looked from outside. Thick log walls sealed with mud and moss. Animal pelts covered the floor and walls. A massive stone hearth filled one side of the room, flames snapping behind an iron grate. The smell of meat and smoke and pine wrapped around her. The man set Caleb down near the fire and shrugged off his coat. Without it, he looked even larger. His arms were thick and scarred. His hands looked like tools shaped from bone and muscle. "Sit," he said, pointing to a bench. "Boy needs food." Evelyn sank down and pulled Caleb into her lap. His lips were still pale. She rubbed his hands, whispering his name until his eyes fluttered open. The man crossed the room and took dried meat from a rack. He dropped chunks into an iron pot, poured water, and hung it over the fire. "What is your name?" Evelyn asked quietly. He paused, surprised she had spoken. "Silas Cole," he said at last. "I am Evelyn Harper. This is my son, Caleb." Silas grunted and turned back to the pot. When the broth was ready, he ladled it into wooden bowls and shoved them across the table. "Eat!" Evelyn fed Caleb first, spooning the hot liquid between his lips. Color slowly returned to his cheeks. Only then did she eat herself, forcing her shaking hands to slow. The food was simple and rich and tasted like survival. Silas watched them in silence. When they finished, he stood. "The boy sleeps there," he said, pointing to a nest of furs by the fire. "You sleep there," he added, nodding toward the bed in the corner. Evelyn's chest tightened. "And you?" "I do not sleep much." He picked up his rifle and went to the door. "Do not try to run. Wolves are thick. Nearest help is days away." Then he was gone. Evelyn sat frozen for a long moment, listening to the wind outside and the fire inside. Caleb sagged against her, exhausted beyond fear. She settled him into the furs. He fell asleep instantly. Only then did her own strength leave her. She lay on the bed, the scent of pine needles and smoke filling her lungs, and let darkness take her. She woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. Through the small window, she saw Silas in the clearing. His movements were steady and powerful, each swing clean and sure. Wood piled up beside him, tall as her shoulder. Caleb stirred. "Mama, where are we?" "Safe," she said, though she did not know what safe meant anymore. Silas came inside with an armload of wood and stacked it neatly. He cooked again, this time making flat cakes from cornmeal and a bit of grease. He gave Caleb a small spoon of molasses. The boy's eyes widened, like he had been given gold. "Thank you," Evelyn said. Silas paused, then resumed eating as if he had not heard. After the meal, he stood in front of her, filling the space. "You know what I said last night." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I remember. Mountain law," he said. "Not town law. A man takes a woman. She works. She stays. She does not run." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I understand you saved our lives. I understand my son needs shelter and food. Beyond that, I make no promises." Something shifted in his eyes. Not anger. Something like respect. "You work for your keep," he said. "Cooking, mending, fire. Try to run, and I will find you. Clear, clear." Days passed. The cabin settled into a rhythm. Silas left each morning to check his trap lines and returned with game. Evelyn cooked and cleaned and learned where everything was stored. She burned meals. She dropped water. He did not yell. He only made her do it again until she learned. Caleb explored the cabin like it was a kingdom. He asked endless questions. Silas answered some. Others he ignored. A blizzard came on the fourth night. Wind screamed through the trees. Snow forced its way into every crack. Ice formed on the inside walls. Caleb began to shiver no matter how many furs Evelyn piled on him. Silas watched for a moment, then stood. "We sleep together tonight. Body heat keeps us alive." Evelyn stiffened. But the truth was plain. They rearranged the furs near the fire. Caleb lay in the middle, Evelyn on one side, Silas on the other. His body was a wall against the cold. Caleb fell asleep quickly, warm and safe. Evelyn lay awake, every sense sharp. She could hear Silas breathing, could feel the heat of him. Nothing happened. He did not touch her. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked softly. Long silence, easier than people. "Were you always alone?" "No." The word was final. Morning came gray and heavy. Silas dug them out and left again. Evelyn stood in the doorway watching him go and realized she no longer thought about running. That night, a storm drove them together again. And again, nothing happened. Only warmth, only survival. Evelyn began to see the careful choices Silas made. The best meat always went to Caleb. The firewood stack was always higher than needed. He left small carved animals near Caleb's furs without comment. One afternoon, while organizing supplies, Evelyn found a wooden box hidden behind sacks of flour. Inside lay a faded dress, tiny shoes, a photograph of a woman with a child on her lap. Understanding washed over her like cold water. That night, Caleb asked, "Mr. Silas, why do you not have children?" Silas's hands stilled. "Had a boy once. Fever took him." "I am sorry," Caleb said. Silas nodded once and handed the boy a piece of antler. "I will teach you to carve." As Evelyn watched their heads bend together by the fire, something tight in her chest loosened. This man had claimed her from desperation, but he was becoming something else. Not gentle, not kind, but steady. And in the mountains, steady could mean life. Spring crept into the mountains like a cautious guest. The snow did not leave all at once. It softened first. It sagged. It began to drip from the eaves in slow, steady beats that echoed through the clearing. The air still bit at night, but daylight carried a different smell. Wet earth, pine sap, something waking up. Evelyn felt it inside herself too, a loosening. A cautious breath she had not allowed since Thomas died. Silas watched the land the way other men watched clocks. He studied the sky at dawn. He tested the snow with his boot. He listened to the water running under ice. "The melt will come early," he said one morning. "That means floods and slides." Evelyn nodded. She trusted his reading of the world now. When he said a storm was coming, she banked the fire and secured the door. When he said the day would hold, she hung damp clothes outside and they dried. Caleb thrived. His cheeks stayed pink now. His steps grew surer. He followed Silas like a shadow, asking questions that never seemed to end. "Why does the snow sound different here? How do you know that track is old?" Why do wolves howl at night? Silas answered when it mattered. Snow tells you how cold it is. Tracks tell you who passed and when. Wolves howl so no one forgets they belong somewhere. One afternoon, Silas took Caleb higher up the ridge while Evelyn worked near the cabin. She split kindling with careful swings and patched a tear in Silas's coat. Her hands were rough now, strong, she noticed without judgment. When they returned, Caleb's eyes shone. "Mama, he taught me how to see where the elk walk." Evelyn smiled. "That is important." Silas watched her a moment longer than usual. He said nothing. The first real trouble came late one afternoon, when Evelyn heard voices in the clearing. Men's voices. Her body reacted before her mind did. She grabbed the spare rifle Silas kept by the door and barred it quietly. Her breath went shallow. The past came roaring back. 3 men stood near the woodpile, horses tied behind them. Their clothes marked them as drifters. Hard men. The kind who learned early that the world only gives what you take. "Hello there," one called. "Anyone home?" Evelyn did not answer. The men laughed among themselves and moved closer. One tried the door. It held. "Now come on," the same man said. "We saw smoke. We know someone's inside." Evelyn raised the rifle and aimed at the window. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. "Leave. My husband will be back soon." The men exchanged looks. One smiled slowly. "Tracks say he left hours ago." Fear burned hot in her chest, but anger burned hotter. These were the same kind of men who had taken Thomas, who had counted on fear to make her small. From the forest behind them came a sound that made her spine stiffen. A long, low call. Not a wolf. Something deeper. The men heard it too. What was that? Another call answered from a different direction. Then another. The horses stamped, uneasy. Before the men could decide what they were hearing, Silas stepped out of the trees. He moved fast, silent. His rifle cracked once. A hat flew off a man's head, sliced clean by the bullet. Silas closed the distance like an avalanche. He struck one man, down with the butt of his rifle. He lifted another by the throat with one hand. "Touch my family," he growled, voice barely human, "and I will leave you for the crows." The man choked and dropped when Silas released him. The third scrambled for his horse. The others followed. They fled without looking back. Evelyn sank against the door as the clearing went quiet. Silas approached slowly. "You hurt." She shook her head. The rifle slipped from her fingers. Suddenly the fear broke loose. She sobbed, hard and shaking, all the terror she had carried since the road spilling out at once. Silas pulled her against his chest. His arms were strong and unsure at the same time. "You did good," he said. "You kept them talking." Caleb ran from the trees and wrapped himself around Silas's leg. "Thank you for keeping Mama safe." Silas's hand rested on the boy's head. "Always," he said. That night, Silas slept beside them, without speaking, not as a wall against the cold, but as a guard against memory. Evelyn did not pull away. Days later, Silas announced they would go to town. "Caleb needs boots," he said, "and we need supplies." The word town made Evelyn's stomach knot. She had not faced other people since the attack. Since she became something different. They rode out at dawn. The settlement of Pine Hollow sat low in a muddy valley, unchanged and watchful. As they entered, voices fell quiet. Eyes followed them. The mountain man. The widow. The child. Whispers brushed Evelyn's ears like thorns. She held her head high. In the general store, the owner hesitated when Silas laid pelts on the counter. "People talk," he muttered. Silas leaned forward. "The woman shops where she pleases." Before more could be said, a well-dressed woman stepped in and drew herself tall with disapproval. "How dare you show your face here?" she said sharply. "Living in sin. Setting such an example. Evelyn felt the old shame rise, then stop. It had no place here anymore. "I am raising my son alive," she said calmly. "That is my example." Before the woman could respond, a familiar voice cut in. "That will do." The town reverend stood in the doorway. His eyes held no judgment, only understanding. "Actions matter more than appearances," he said. "And from what I hear, these people have helped more than most." The store went quiet. They left with supplies and no apologies. That night, camped beside a creek, Evelyn sat awake while Caleb slept. The stars were bright. The world felt wide. "Am I still property to you?" she asked quietly. Silas stared into the fire a long time. "Started that way," he said. "Needed order. Survival. And now you are Evelyn, not mine. With me." She reached for his hand. He did not pull away. In the dark, something settled between them. Not a promise. Not yet. But a choice, quietly made. Summer rose fast in the high country. Snow retreated up the slopes and left the ground soft and dark, ready for seed. Streams ran loud with meltwater, and the mountains smelled of green things fighting their way back to life. Evelyn watched it happen with a quiet sense of wonder. She had not expected to see spring again. Not after that winter. Not after the grave in the snow. Caleb grew like the land around them. Stronger, taller. His laughter came easier now. He helped Silas set traps and learned to read the ground like a book written in mud and broken twigs. At night he practiced his letters with charcoal on a smooth board Evelyn had made. One morning, Caleb woke burning with fever. It came fast. Too fast. By midday, his skin was hot and damp, his eyes unfocused. He cried out for his father in a thin, broken voice that cut straight through Evelyn's chest. Silas checked him once, then again. His face went hard and pale. "We need medicine," he said. "Town doctor." "I am coming with you," Evelyn said. He shook his head. "Someone stays. Keeps him cool. Gets water in him." She wanted to argue. Fear clawed at her throat, but Caleb whimpered and reached for her hand. "Go fast," she whispered. Silas did not answer. He was already gone. The hours stretched cruel and slow. Evelyn bathed Caleb's forehead. She whispered prayers she barely believed in. She promised things she could not control. By nightfall, hoofbeats thundered into the clearing. Silas returned with the town doctor and the reverend riding hard behind him. The doctor worked quickly, quietly. "Fever sickness," he said. "Next day is the danger." They stayed. They all stayed. Evelyn and Silas did not leave Caleb's side. They held him through the worst of it, their hands never letting go. Near dawn, the fever broke. Caleb slept, deep and steady. Evelyn sagged against Silas, sobbing with relief. He held her without words. That morning the Reverend spoke gently. "A boy needs schooling. A doctor nearby. You do not have to leave the mountains. Just come closer." Silas listened. Really listened. Later, when they were alone, he spoke. "There is a valley not far from town. Still wild, but safer." Evelyn looked at him. "You would do that." "For him," Silas said. "For you." They built through summer, a new cabin, strong, warm, with windows that let light in and a small room just for Caleb. Town men came to help, some quietly ashamed, some grateful, none unkind. When the walls stood and the roof went on, Silas took Evelyn's hands. "Marry me," he said, "not for law, not for debt, because I choose you." She did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, "I choose you too." They married in the meadow with mountains watching and wind in the grass. Caleb stood between them, beaming like he had always belonged there. Years later, when winter came again, it came gently. Evelyn watched the snow fall from the safety of her home. Silas split wood. Caleb read by the fire. A baby slept in her arms, warm and fed and loved. She thought of the woman she had been in the snow with wolves listening. She barely recognized her now. The mountains had taken much.